Hello, my name's Julie Greenfield. I'm the Head of Research at Ataxia UK, and today I'll be giving a research update on Friedreich's ataxia research. So to start off with, I will give an overview of the talk. I'm going to start with telling you a little bit about what Ataxia UK does to facilitate and promote research and lead to the progress of research, going through various of the Ataxia UK research activities. I'll then move on to talk about some of the developments in new treatments and new approaches that are being used in order to find treatments for Friedreich's ataxia. And I'll be focusing a little bit on preclinical research, but mostly I'll be focusing on research that's actually progressed to human clinical trials. And lastly, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the opportunities that there are to take part in research in the UK. So Ataxia UK promotes and facilitates research with the aim of finding treatments and making them available to people with ataxia. We do this in a number of ways. So for example, we fund research projects, and mostly this is small research grants to get initial results so that then researchers can go to some of the larger funding bodies to get the larger grants. And when we looked at our impact report for 2021, we actually found that for every £1 Ataxia UK spent on research projects, it raised almost £6 in further funding of ataxia research. And that is really encouraging news for us. It shows that we're selecting good projects that are being funded elsewhere following our input, and also that the researchers we're selecting are actually really engaged in ataxia research and continuing their career in ataxia and making progress. Another one of the activities Ataxia UK is largely involved in is organising research conferences and meetings. And these are really important opportunities for researchers from around the world to get together, share ideas, and help in the progress of research. We've done this for a number of years with our partners around the world, other ataxia charities, and the next one we're planning for is in March 2022, the International Congress for Ataxia Research. And for this, we're partnering with the American organisations FARA and NAF. Collaboration really is key to advancing research, and this is very central to what Ataxia UK does. So we form a link between researchers and the ataxia community. So for example, we always facilitate the recruitment to studies. And this isn't only clinical trials, but also responding to surveys and collecting very useful information from people with ataxia. We very much believe in patient engagement in research, and we try and involve people with ataxia in everything that we do, from our scientific advisory committee all the way to organising workshops to get people's input in designing the best clinical trials and things of that kind. We work closely with pharma and biotech companies as well. And although sometimes this information is confidential and we cannot necessarily share it, we really are doing what we can to help progress, encourage involvement in ataxia research in some of the newer companies, and assist with the programs of ones who already have ataxia established programs. We help by collecting useful information and providing introductions to experts and this kind of thing. We're really trying to be engaged in all stages of research, right from the beginning. So we've got the preclinical work, going down to the clinical trials, leading to the drug approval process, and we try and provide as much input as we can when dealing with the regulators. And finally, the last step being the treatment being available on the NHS, so that really, even after drug approval, there's quite a lot to be done in terms of trying to make sure that patients actually will get access to the drugs that have been approved. And we try and be involved in every stage of this research. Now, moving on to the actual FA research itself. So the aim of FA research, what goes wrong in Friedreich's ataxia? There's a mistake in the frataxin gene, and that leads to a reduction in the amount of frataxin protein, which has an important function within the cells. And once again, this reduction in frataxin protein leads to a number of disrupted processes within the cells. So you get oxidative stress, which is very damaging to the cell. You get an increase in iron within the mitochondria, which are the energy producing compartments of the cells and where frataxin is found to perform its function. You get cell damage, you get a disruption in this function of the mitochondria, and a decrease in the energy produced. So there's a number of processes that happen downstream of the mistake in the frataxin gene. And this means that having got all this knowledge, and although there's still a lot of research ongoing to find out the nitty-gritty and the sort of detail of this process, it means that we've got a number of places that could be targeted to try and develop treatments. The first place is by using genetic approaches to actually correct or replace this frataxin gene that has a mistake in it. The next point we can intervene is in increasing the amount of the frataxin protein itself. And lastly, there are many different approaches that can be dealt with trying to target these disrupted cellular processes. And I'll be going through all these different approaches in the next few slides. So starting off with the developments in new treatments which involve genetic approaches. So looking at the sort of core problem in Friedreich's ataxia, the mistake in the frataxin gene. So a number of research groups around the world, both in companies and in academia within universities, are trying to develop gene therapies for Friedreich's ataxia. And that would involve either replacing or editing the frataxin gene. I'd like to highlight an example here with a company called Novartis Gene Therapies, who recently made an announcement, which was a positive announcement. Now, this company has actually got an approved treatment, which is a gene therapy treatment for another rare neurological condition called SMA, and that is actually available in the NHS in this country. So that is really encouraging. And this company is using a virus as a vehicle to deliver the gene. And this is a very common approach in gene therapy. And they have some promising results from their preclinical studies in cell and animal studies, and they are now due to submit. They have announced that they're due to submit an investigational new drug application by the end of 2021. And that is an application that you need to submit before you're allowed to actually do a trial in humans. And they're therefore hoping for a first in human trial in 2022. So that is really exciting, that there might be a gene therapy trial starting in Friedreich's ataxia. And then on the right here, I've listed a number of different companies who all have programs developing gene therapies for Friedreich's ataxia. And that is really encouraging to see such a long list, a number of different groups looking at this approach. And as I said, there are also groups within universities who are working on this as well. And Ataxia UK is in fact funding a group in Spain looking at gene therapy in Friedreich's ataxia as well. The next approach, as I mentioned, was targeting this reduction in the frataxin protein. And there are a number of different approaches being used to try and increase this frataxin protein, which will hopefully lead to improvements in the ataxia in the development of a treatment. So there's been a couple of announcements recently from two companies. One is called Design Therapeutics, and they've developed a small molecule therapy called gene-targeted chimeras. And they've just announced some positive results from cell and animal studies using this therapy. And they then aim to have phase 1 clinical trial in the first half of next year of 2022. So once again, really exciting with this new trial being planned. And the company Execure has developed some oligonucleotides, which are sort of pieces of DNA of RNA, of genetic material that attach to a lipid nanoparticle, which targets the mRNA. And indeed, they also have found, using mouse studies and patient cells, that they found an increase in the frataxin and an improvement in the mitochondrial function, which is this compartment within the cell where frataxin is found to do its function. And similarly, they've aimed to do first in human studies in early next year. So really exciting developments that have been announced recently for these approaches to try and increase the frataxin level within the cells, which you then hope will lead to improvements in the ataxia. Another approach to increasing frataxin levels is one that's been going on for quite some time, and it was a program that started a number of years ago by an academic group in the US and has now been taken over by a company called Larimar Therapeutics. And this is a frataxin replacement therapy, so actually introducing frataxin to the cells. And this company have this product called CT11601, and it is a fusion protein with the frataxin and this sort of fused protein that delivers frataxin to the mitochondria. And we now have some results of the first phase 1 trials in people with Friedreich's ataxia. It was a small placebo-controlled trial with 28 people, and they had increasing doses of this drug by subcutaneous injections. And they found that there was an increase in frataxin in all the doses used, and there was some good safety, which supported continuation of the trial. And further trials are now being planned. Now, unfortunately, in May this year, the US regulator, the FDA, announced that there needed to be a clinical hold because of some animal toxicity study data that the company had provided with them. And they needed some more information and a report before further trials can start. So hopefully this issue will be resolved, and hopefully this can progress and be another approach that could be developed into a therapy for Friedreich's ataxia. Now, another way of increasing frataxin levels, which is an approach being used by various groups around the world, is a drug repurposing approach. So you can take drugs that are already in existence and are being used to treat patients with different conditions and repurpose them and see if they work in Friedreich's ataxia. And here is one example where this has happened. And this is a study using calcitriol, which is an active form of vitamin D. And it's a study Ataxia UK funded in Spain. And they did some cell studies and animal cell model studies, and they found that this calcitriol led to an improvement in mitochondrial function, increased cell survival, and increased frataxin. And they just started a trial last month in Spain in 20 people for 1 year. And they're looking at safety and looking at the effect on quality of life. So it's a small trial, but it's really quite satisfying that the investment we put into this initial study has led to a trial in people. And we shall see what happens with that as well. And then I wanted to very briefly mention HealX, which is a company who has an artificial intelligence approach. Ataxia UK is collaborating with them, and they're doing an FA program where they're using their AI approach to predict what kind of drugs could potentially be useful in FA based on the disease mechanisms and knowledge that's already out there. And then when they find these predictions, they will then test them in cell studies. And there's a talk by HealX at the annual conference this year on Sunday. So I would encourage you to listen to that because it's a very interesting approach. More drug repurposing studies that are ongoing, a drug called etravirine, which is an antiviral used to treat HIV. And this was shown some time ago to increase frataxin in cells derived from patients. And it's being currently tested in a phase 2 clinical trial in Italy to study its safety and efficacy in FA. And Ataxia UK are actually funding a project in this group to test drugs that may have a similar structure or function to etravirine to see if there's other drugs that could also be useful in Friedreich's ataxia. Now, moving on to looking at the third approach. So we've looked at the gene, looking at targeting the gene. We've looked at the increase in the levels of frataxin. Now, the last approach that's being looked at by many groups around the world is looking at these disrupted cell processes and trying to find drugs that can actually target one of these places to hopefully lead to an improvement in the symptoms in FA. And one of the prime examples, one which has shown a lot of excitement around the world, is the Reata omaveloxolone trial, the MOXIE trial. Now, the rationale for this omaveloxolone is that in FA, you get a dysfunction in the mitochondria and a decrease in the energy, as I mentioned earlier. And this OMAV seems to restore the mitochondrial function in FA cell models by activating a particular pathway, a particular transcription factor called NRF2, which is normally reduced in FA. So it's kind of targeting a particular thing that goes wrong within cells of FA. And this is a multi-center trial, and the London Ataxia Centre was the UK trial site, and then there were sites around the world in the US and other parts of the world. And the trial has 3 parts, part 1, 2, and then an open label extension, and it's in adults, in people over 60. And I'll now go over the trial in a little bit more detail. So part 1 had 69 people taking part, and they were randomly assigned to either OMAV or placebo in a 3-to-1 ratio. And this was quite a short study, 12 weeks, and it was meant to determine the safety and what dose should be used in part 2. Part 2 is then slightly larger, 103 adults, and they're randomized 1-to-1 OMAV to placebo. And this was again to determine the safety and the efficacy of one particular dose. And this was a longer trial, it was 48 weeks and nearly a year. And then this was followed by the open label extension. So everybody who took part in part 1 and part 2 was given the opportunity to be on the OMAV, on the drug, and then analyzed, and the company's been analyzing the data from this open label extension as well. So the results from part 1 were released some time ago and were published, and they found the best dose to be used, they found good safety, and they found that there was an improvement in the modified Friedreich's ataxia rating scale, which is a common rating scale used to measure different aspects of ataxia. However, it was a small study. So then moving on to results of part 2, they were announced towards the end of 2019 and later published. And these results showed that patients taking OVAV for the 48 weeks had a statistically significant improvement in their symptoms associated with FA compared to those that were on placebo. And this was measured by the mFARS, which is this modified Friedreich's ataxia rating scale. And then in May this year, there were some further results announced, and these were the results of the extension phase. And once again, they showed some further positive evidence for the effect of omaveloxolone. So having all these positive results, Reata has obviously been in discussions with the US regulators to try and seek drug approval for omaveloxolone. And to give a little bit of the time scale, in November 2020, the FDA, the US regulators, did an initial review of the data from part 2 and part of the extension, and they asked for additional analyses to be done by the company. And they also intimated that there may be a need for another trial to gather more data before the drug could be considered for approval. In January this year, Ataxia UK supported FARA's campaign to ask the FDA and Reata to consider approval of the drug based on the existing data. And this campaign was really successful in terms of the numbers of people, because 74,000 people actually wrote in support of this campaign. Then later in the year, as I mentioned in May, there were some positive results of the extension phase that were announced. And then very recently, at the end of September, Reata made another announcement, and it said that they had completed their meeting with the FDA, which is called a pre-new drug application meeting. And that after this meeting, they reaffirmed their plans to submit a new drug application in the first quarter of next year of 2022. And they also mentioned that they're not planning to do a second trial pre-approval being submitted, pre-approval study prior to submission to the FDA. So the plan is to submit with the data they have and see what the FDA says. So the hope is that they will approve it, but of course we'll have to see. And Ataxia UK is closely monitoring the situation of what happens in terms of drug approval in the US. And of course, we'll be very keen to get drug approval in the UK as well for Ataxia UK's members and supporters and everybody. Now, the next trial I wanted to talk about was one by a company called PTC Therapeutics, and it's with an antioxidant called vatiquinone. And they showed some positive results in small phase 2 trials, which have then led to a global phase 3 trial ongoing. This is a placebo-controlled trial in 110 adults and children. So this study actually includes children as well, and it's for 18 months. They're similarly using as the primary outcome, as a way of measuring the effect of the drug, they're using the modified Friedreich's ataxia rating scale. And this started in December 2020. We're Ataxia UK are actually collaborating with PTC Therapeutics via our association with Euroataxia, and we're supporting them in gathering some data to evaluate the health-related quality of life, and we'll be doing this by some interviews. So we're really happy to support them in this program, because this is really crucial information that is important at the drug approval and post-approval phase in order to get things funded and supported by the National Health Service. So another trial I wanted to mention was one by a company called Minorix, and they are testing a different drug. This is a PPAR gamma activator in people with Friedreich's ataxia. And this drug is called MIN-102. And this PPAR gamma is a protein that's found in cells. It's a naturally occurring protein. And in FA, it can't work properly. So this is the rationale for the study. A phase 1 clinical trial showed that this drug is well tolerated and is able to reach the brain. And then in a phase 2 trial in Europe, including 39 people, there were some results released not long ago showing some promising results for safety and some promising results for upper limb ataxia, so some of the coordination movements of the arms. However, the primary outcome measure, which is what they had tried to see as the primary thing to test in this trial, the changes in spinal cord results were inconclusive. And this company is now looking at possibly doing other trials. Now, there are another 3 trials that are ongoing. There's the resveratrol trial, which is a naturally occurring compound found in the skin of grapes. And this potentially could improve the mitochondrial function. And a trial is ongoing in Australia with 40 people, and this is a placebo-controlled trial. And then there are 2 smaller trials. One which started recently in the US is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide precursor trial with 10 patients, 10 adults. And the other one is artesunate trial, which is a phase 1-2 study starting in France with 20 people and an open label, so not placebo-controlled trial. So there's a number of trials ongoing, and it's really exciting that all these different approaches to target different parts of the system to try and develop treatments for Friedreich. So this is really encouraging. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is, of course, all the studies we looked at here are ways in which you're trying to stop the progression or result in improvement of the underlying cause of Friedreich's ataxia. However, there are also ways in which the research is moving towards symptomatic relief. So some of the approaches we've looked at in speech therapy and in physiotherapy approaches, the idea there is trying to improve some of the symptoms that people with ataxia are living with. And one I wanted to talk about today is this one, which is being studied by a group in Italy. And this is where they're applying a low electrical current to the scalp. And the thought is that this may alleviate symptoms of ataxia. The technique they're using is called cerebellar transcranial direct current stimulation. Ataxia UK has funded a study of this stimulation in Italy. It used a range of ataxias, Friedreich, SCARS, MSA, and the results came out in 2021, and they showed improvements in the SARA scale, the ICAR scale, which are ataxia rating scales, in cognition and quality of life scores. And this is quite a short-term treatment, so you kind of have to repeat treatments, but they were really encouraging results. The next thing that this team are doing is they're actually looking at an alternative kind of stimulation, which is called transcranial alternating current stimulation. And Ataxia UK is again funding this trial to look at this team, to look at this particular technique. And they believe that this may be more effective than the transcranial direct current stimulation. So we'll see what happens with these results as well, a different type of approach. Now, lastly, I wanted to just touch base a little bit on opportunities to take part in research. This is a question we're often asked: what can I do to help in the research process? One of the big things you can do is join the FA Global Patient Registry. So there are many FA charities, including Ataxia UK, do have patient registries of some kind. So we do use them to communicate to people with ataxia, to let them know about research studies and trials. However, some time ago, Ataxia UK came together with a number of patient groups, including FARA, to build a new international registry, the FA Patient Global Registry. And this is a global effort to pool information all in one place, so making it a much more powerful tool for research, helps understand the condition, helps understand the experiences that people are going through. So this is really a useful tool that we would like to encourage people to take part in. And here is the link. At the moment, we have more than 1,000 people who have registered since late 2019 from 51 different countries. And meaning, it really is a truly international effort, which is wonderful and very needed for rare diseases such as Friedreich's ataxia. Very recently this year, the charity EndFA set up an app for people with FA to try and facilitate research, another way of facilitating research. And their aims are to connect people with FA with researchers who are running clinical trials, including virtual research trials. So there may be ways in which you could collect data from the app and use it in a virtual way, which means that people from all over the world could take part. You don't have to be living in the country where the research study is taking place. They aim to empower patients with useful tools to manage their lives, provide information, education, etc. And here is the link to the app. Another study which is very important is the EFAC study, and this is a European multi-site study looking in the natural history of Friedreich's ataxia, and involves patients, people with Friedreich's ataxia, attending annual appointments and where ataxia rating scales are performed, and a number of useful pieces of information are gathered, as well as samples taken. Now, within the UK, London, the London Ataxia Centre is the site that is still recruiting patients for this study, and the data data is importantly being published and being used to design trials. So it's really useful information. So if anybody who's got Friedreich's ataxia and is willing to help with research effort and travel to London, this is a really worthwhile project to be part of. And over the years, Ataxia and Ataxia UK have also supported it with some funding, and there are also pharma partners. So here are the contact details for the London Ataxia Centre for joining this project. Now, we also publicise sort of surveys and healthcare research opportunities on our website. So at the moment, we're collaborating with Google's AI for Social Good programme. And this project that Google's doing is collecting speech samples with people who have problems with, who have speech difficulties in order to improve their voice recognition technology and things such as Google Assistant. This is another opportunity to help develop products that might be useful for people with ataxia. And then I've mentioned this other survey that we ran, and that was a COVID-19 and ataxia survey, where we asked people who thought they had COVID to complete a survey, and Ataxia UK's medical advisors were hoping to learn more about the impact of COVID on people with ataxia. And we're currently analysing the data, and we're submitting it for publication as well. So we'll let you know how that goes too. In terms of clinical trials, we know that the European Friedreich's ataxia nicotinamide trial, which has been delayed, is hoping to start in January. And in the UK, they're aiming to recruit 90 people at this, within London, and then there'll be other participants in other European countries. So watch this space, and importantly, do join Ataxia UK to be kept informed of all these new research opportunities. We inform people via our magazine, which is quarterly, our monthly e-newsletter, social media, and we also put information up on our website. And here is the page of our website where we put information on opportunities to take part in research. And you'll see here that there's a specific section for Friedreich's ataxia, and also one more generically on healthcare studies, such as the surveys that we mentioned. So thank you very much, and I'll be answering any questions during the conference.